来都没掉，是鼻子的一根儿。正常我这个烟灰啊，鼻子的一根儿。看不到，一会儿能看到了。手电有电，哎呦我操！啊！操你妈！操你妈！我操你个妈的！啊！我操你妈！我操你妈的！
Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. So this happened to me in July of this year. Just to give context, I was not to discount any of the possible wildlife explanations. At the time, I lived in the Midwest in a suburban area that was fairly populated near a very populated city. There was no place that could be considered rural within at least a 40-mile radius. So anyways, to start my experience, it was late at night and I was hanging out with my golden retriever, Leo, who was just turning a year old in a couple weeks at the time. I was just watching YouTube in my room while he lay on the floor next to me. It was about 12:30 a.m. and he was ready for bed, so I had to take him out before we both went to sleep. So I got him on his leash and we went outside. My family and I lived in a large apartment complex. The apartments have quite a few rooms and their own personal garage, but they still have 8 to 10 apartments per building. So the buildings are very long and slim. Behind our building is a long strip of grass that goes out about 15 feet. Then a large tree line that is 20 feet deep and about 200 feet long. Leo and I go out the front around the building to the back, as we don't have an exit to the back. We are on the second floor, and we all have our own separate entrances. We make it back to the grassy area, and I walk out into the grass with him to let him do his business. I am on my phone, not really paying attention, and we stand there for a good minute. I realize it's been a good amount of time, and I notice Leo hasn't moved one bit. I turned off my phone and looked at him, and I realized he hadn't moved from the spot we stopped at and was looking at the other building right by the woods. He had been frozen the whole time. I petted him, and he looked up at me, and when I stopped petting him, he looked straight back at the same spot. I hadn't at the time realized he was looking at that spot that whole time until then, and looked over to where he was looking. My eyes were not adjusted to the darkness, and I could only see the shadow of the building. The only source of light was street lights about 50 feet behind us. I looked back at him and quietly chuckled, because I thought he just heard a squirrel and was all perked up. It was very cute, and I then looked back at my phone. Leo, in the corner of my eye, about 15 seconds later, flinched back as if he had been startled by something and started to whine. I looked over at the spot this time, realizing now that he was scared of something he saw while we had been out there. My eyes were now adjusted to the dark. I saw what he was fixated on now. In the shadow of the building, right next to the corner of the wall in front of the tree line, about 15 feet away from me, was that creature. I could only see a black outline as it was not lit up enough, but it was massive. I know how tall the building was relative to me. When it was standing right next to the building, it was about 5 feet tall. That wouldn't be very tall if it were standing upright, but this thing was on all fours. The best way I can describe how it looked is when a bulldog snarls and kind of flexes its front legs when trying to intimidate something, but was scaled up to be 5 feet tall and had more muscle. Its outline was much wider. There is no way that this was any creature in the Midwest. The only creature that is remotely close to that is a black bear. That's only way up north, nowhere near where I am in the southeastern part of my state. There are no wooded areas for a bear to live in anyway, as stated in the beginning. Plus, the maximum height a black bear on all fours can be is 3 feet, which is not very broad. This thing surpassed that by a long shot and was very broad. I jumped back in fear and was just frozen after that for a solid 30 seconds, just staring at it. I then backed away slowly, keeping my eye on it the whole time. Leo then began to growl and snarl at it, and we rounded the corner. Leo has never acted aggressive like that ever before, so this just made me even more terrified. I then peeked around the corner, no more than a second later, and it was gone. No noise, no shadow swiftly moving behind the building, just gone. There's no way something could have moved behind the building that fast without a sound, especially of that size. This freaked me out even more, and I sprinted back inside the house. I would really like to think that I was hallucinating this and was just tired, but it was clear as day. I have never told anyone this story before, and it freaks me out to this day. I used to have a part-time job as a security guard at a senior home, not assisted living, so there weren't any nurses or such on the premises, just me and 50 or 100 old people. My shift was weekends from 6 p.m. through 6 a.m., though nothing really happened until 10 p.m., when all the visitors left and the residents were asleep. I walked around checking windows and doors, making sure they were locked. The cafeteria has a door to the back garden. I made sure to lock it too, after finishing my rounds. It's 4 stories high. I get back to my desk and I see movement in the garden. It's windy, so I assumed it was just trees and bushes blowing around, but I keep a close eye on it. That's when I see the shape of a person in a white dress dancing in the garden. I race to the cafeteria and see nothing. After checking the door, it's still locked. I go back to my desk and watch the feed. She comes back, whirling around, and it makes me feel cold. I grab my phone and go check one more time, but still nothing. But this time, the door is unlocked. I relock it, head back to my desk, and look through the cameras. Nobody is in the building, but I walk around just in case. After confirming nobody is inside, I sit back down and calm down, assuming I mistakenly unlocked the door. Then I see a shadowy figure standing in front of the main entrance doors. I look at the front camera. There is nothing there. I look back to the door and the shadow is standing right there. That's when things got really weird. The shadow smiled, disappeared, and then the doors opened. To open those doors, you need a security card or a resident opens them from the inside. Nobody was there to buzz them in. My desk is in front of the doors, and nobody was outside to use a card, but the door is wide open. I brace myself to deal with whatever tries to enter through the second set of doors. Those are just motion sensors. Nothing comes. The outside doors close, and the inside doors remain shut. After the doors shut, I saw a flash of light in the garden camera, but then nothing. I decide to call maintenance and tell them about the faulty door, and I walk outside to investigate, going around the whole building just in case I find a kid messing with me. That's when I see the giant steel double doors where the dumpsters are stored. They're bent outward. A vehicle hitting the doors would push them inward, but the doors looked like they were rammed from the inside. When I mentioned that to maintenance, they were shocked. The doors were fine when my shift started, and I didn't hear any noise. I quit a week later. Hi. I never posted before and am not quite sure if this is the right place, but here we go anyway. This is one of the scariest things to happen to me as a kid, and it has always stuck with me. It was about 10 years ago, and I was 9 years old. I had just moved back to California with my family. We were to be living with my grandmother in a cramped 2-bed, 2-bathroom apartment, and I was excited. My grandma was an older, pretty religious Filipino woman, a converted Hindu and faithful Catholic. I'm not sure if that's a contradiction, because I don't know much about either religion, but her house had lots of shrines, candles, paintings of Jesus and Hindu gods, and this overall weird energy I could palpably feel as a kid. It's important to note that I now consider myself a very open person, someone who may unknowingly attract these sorts of occurrences. This may not be important to the story, or maybe so. I'm not entirely sure, but as a child, I would hear music and voices whispering to me, as well as smell strange things when triggered by certain words. At the time of this event, this was something I was used to and knew about myself. Because of this, I had some interest in Wicca and the occult. Not as much as I would later have, because I was still a child, but enough to often sit on the floor of my aunt's dimly lit and cramped room and look at her books on witchcraft. I don't know when and why, but around that time, I began to have super strange, frequent, and all-encompassing thoughts of the devil and demons. It would always be running through my mind, and I would comfort myself by remembering to recite some of the Hail Mary my mother had taught me. My aunt's room had a really creepy, suffocating feel to it, but I'd always spend time alone up there. Even though I felt as if there was something watching me, I could place the energy gaze, I guess. Boo. Coming from in front of her closet. My aunt is mentally ill and was not on medication at the time, so her room was filled with stuff, especially the closet. It was always open, about a couple of feet or so, with lots of her things kind of stuffed in and falling out, and it was always pitch black on that side of the room, especially in the closet. From what I could see, I slept up there with her, and I was so jumpy and afraid all the time that I couldn't even shower by myself. One night, my aunt goes out, and my mother, my little brother, and I go to sleep on her bed. I remember being so afraid, and I couldn't stop staring at this creepy green fairy thing that my aunt had hung from a string near her bed. It always seemed to sway, and I felt that when I looked into its eyes, it was sentient or something. I was in between my mom and brother, but sleeping the opposite way from them at their feet, staring at the space near the closet. I went to sleep, and in my dream, I woke up. I sat straight up and felt such dread and fear that I'll never forget. In the dream, I tapped my mom awake, and she looked at me in surprise. She said, "Ayanna, you're bleeding." I then felt my nose and realized blood was dripping from it. Then my eyes, my ears, and my mouth. I got super freaked out and said, "Mommy, I've been thinking about the devil a lot," and something along the lines of how I couldn't stop and was really scared. But by the time I was done talking, she'd actually laid back and gone back to sleep. Then, in a moment of horror, something was on top of me. It was dark, and I couldn't see, but I remember thinking it was a little white man. It was sitting on my chest with its knees on my collarbones, growling, hissing, and making terrifying noises, while it literally, and I mean literally, choked the absolute hell out of me. I was trying to flail my arms around, but I couldn't move. It lasted so long that I remember thinking, "Oh my God, when will this end?" And then, as suddenly as that, I awoke for real. I was lying on my back, breathing heavily and feeling sore, in the exact same spot as the dream. Briefly, I thought, "Oh no, is this real? Will it happen again?" So I lay in silence until I could muster the courage to turn and look at the closet. I felt absolutely horrified. The space was radiating the most intense, deep hate and evil. I will never forget it. It has stuck with me for so long. I could just feel something staring at me so intensely, and also the sense that it knew that I knew it was there, and that we were looking at each other in that moment. I rubbed my mom's hip for comfort and laid back down, immediately starting on a Hail Mary. I did it again and again until I could fall back asleep. For some reason, I also felt, although I was sleeping, that whatever was left, I could sense it walking out of the room. When I woke up, I went to stand near the closet, and the space felt kind of empty. Anyway, I grew up and forgot about this story. I used to tell it to friends for a scary laugh, but I've just finished my first year of college and moved back here for the summer, so it's been on my mind. This wasn't even the most frightening thing to happen in this house, so we'll see if any other future things happen. Hopefully not, Elmfeo. So let me preface this by saying I'm an overnight guard at a hospital. I've been here for about 5 years or so. Overall, I've been working night security in various settings for about 12 years. Before that, I was a Marine. My point is that I'm used to odd situations and general bumps in the night. The hospital where I work has had its share of weird shit happen, as many old buildings do, but nothing too crazy. Tonight was different though. Part of the job is patrolling and unlocking this really old building, as in one of the first buildings in the city. It's currently used as the College of Nursing, but at night it's deserted. Well, about 3 a.m. or so. It's peaceful. I won't say the K word. In the hospital, so I wander over to get the keys out of the way. I've been in this building a lot, probably 2 to 5 times a week, every week for the last 5 years. I've gotten used to the creepiness, and I honestly kind of like the quiet. Tonight was odd though. As soon as I approached, I got this odd feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was that feeling of being watched by a predator. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows the feeling. Your hackles raise, so to speak, and your mind screams, "Get out if there." I stop outside and scan the street behind me, and the courtyard I'm standing in. Nothing is obvious, but I can't shake the feeling. I go inside and lock the doors behind me, making a note to unlock them last. That feeling doesn't go away though. As I'm walking the floors one by one, it only gets worse as I move towards the older parts of the building. Now I know I'm the only one in this building. I've been all through the first floor, and all the entrances are locked up tight. You can only do that with a key. As I grumble into the upper floors though, I start hearing things. It starts with footsteps. It's hard to tell because it's like they're matching my cadence. What gets my attention is that it sounds like hard-soled shoes, not like the boots I'm wearing. I turn back and search the halls, but find absolutely nothing. Then I hear a door slam from the hall I just came from. I run back. Maybe it took me a few seconds to get to the door, but nothing. It opens to an empty auditorium, which I thoroughly searched for but found nothing. At this point, I shrug it off. Old building and all. Maybe the pipes were clicking and I thought footsteps. Maybe I missed a door being open and it rattled closed as I walked by. I continue on with that feeling, getting stronger and stronger. I'm on the stairs to the 4th floor, and I'm taking a second to breathe and mess with my phone. I hear a door below me slam shut, and the distinct sound of footsteps echoing in the stairwell. I pull my radio to call dispatch and let them know some people in the building. It beeps, telling me the batteries are dead and won't call out. Shit. I call on my phone and dispatch says they'll send some guys. I wait, but I'm not hearing any more footsteps. No doors, no sounds at all. I walk all the way back down and back up to 4, and I find no one. Now I'm second guessing myself and anticipating the coming jokes on my behalf. I move along, figuring I'll finish the last floor, work my way down, and meet up with the other guards. I open the door to the 4th floor and everything is different. I'm not talking about a change in atmosphere or anything like that. I'm saying that the entire floor, which consists of old offices used for storage and whatnot, is completely different. White painted walls now have wood paneling. The clutter is gone, replaced by old lab and medical equipment and filing cabinets instead of boxes. The biggest change: at the end of the hall in each corner are 2 leather-bound chairs and 2 men sitting in them talking to each other. They stop and look at me as I stand there, holding the door in stunned silence. I blink, and it's all gone, right back to normal. I don't understand it. 1 second, it's completely different from the hundreds of times I've stepped onto that floor. Next second, poof, back to normal. Instinctively, I try my radio again, remembering the dead battery as I hit the button, and it works. I call out that I'm on the 4th floor and I need units up here as I start to check through each office. Of course, everything's normal when everyone gets there, and I'm still left wondering what the hell happened. We finish checking the building, and I catch my fair share of bullshit from the other guys. I go down to dispatch because I know we have cameras on those floors, and I want to know what happened. I get to dispatch, and we review the cameras. We see the door open as I come in. Then the feed freezes entirely for about 8 seconds. Not necessarily unusual, but not very common. especially on those cameras. That tends to happen in more commonly traveled areas. So the dispatcher, a man who's been here since grass first sprouted, asks me what I saw. I describe it to him and he says, "Weird. That's how it looked back in the 80s, before they redid the lower floors, and those were all labs for the college." At this point, I'm just speechless and decide to save myself from further embarrassment and say I must just be tired and seeing things. I know that's not the case though. I'm wide awake, and I know what I saw. I know what I heard through the rest of the building too. I just don't know how to explain it. Everybody has their weird experiences in the building, but man, this one really threw me. Over the course of a few days, I've come to remember a number of pretty weird happenings around my old childhood home. I've been able to confirm some with my parents, but my siblings often do not remember, tend to believe that it may have been a prank by other such siblings, or outright deny it every time it happens. It'd probably be wise to explain a little bit about this house. Early in the 90s, my parents moved from their original city to the new city, with my mother pregnant with my younger brother. When shown the home, my parents took note that nothing was out of the ordinary, but the showing was rather brief, and they were also in a little bit of a hurry. They soon decided to rent the house and moved in, and to their dismay, they found the basement filled to the brim with markings all over the walls, ceiling, and floorboards. The walls had spray-painted demonic symbolism all over them, coupled with what my father describes as odd circles, which my mother confirms as witches' circles or demonic markings, some of which burned into the wood. My mother later confirmed a few Ouija boards were etched into the walls as well. They complained, and instead of moving, they had the basement cleaned, repainted, fixed, and continued to stay for the duration of my childhood. The first occurrences happened when I was between the ages of 5 and 9 years old, continuing for the entire 4 years. Roughly every night, I would refuse to go upstairs, under any circumstance. I would physically refuse and fight my mother or father, and I would often throw a huge fit when they attempted to physically move me upstairs. When finally asked why I was so vehemently refusing to go upstairs, I outright told my parents, "The girl in the white dress at the top of the stairs says it is not safe yet." The funny thing is that I remember the little girl up until recently. I can't remember her face, but I remember she was about 7 and would tell me not to come upstairs. It wasn't safe. She wouldn't outright speak. She would somehow convey the message while shaking her head. I remember that because it scared me the most when I was a kid. She would look in the direction of my room for a little bit, every so often, and then simply look at me and disappear. That is when I knew it was safe to go upstairs. When I reached the age of 10, this stopped happening altogether. I never saw the girl again, but different. Stranger things began to happen. Late one night in our backyard, someone was murdered moments before my father came home. Fortunately, that night he decided to come through the front door instead of the back. Later, an odd meat was thrown in our backyard, and we found our dog smelling it. My dad brought him in, and the police restricted all access to our backyard for the remainder of the year. We later found out that the victim was shredded to death. We always assumed that was the meat. Of course, this likely made things worse, as a lot of the blood from that meat was on our property and took a while to clear out. Within the same year, my brother and I had a small area set up for us in the basement to play. Each time we would go down there, we would hear strange whistling. This whistling was very similar to a human whistling, a tune while doing busy work, but was often eerie. For an entire year, my brother and I were trying to find the source of the whistle, and when we found it, we were terrified. I remember it well. I was turning 11 soon, and we followed it behind the furnace. There, we found a shadow, similar to a human shadow, cast upon the wall. It was tall. It had a hat, and it had no features, just like a normal shadow. It confused us because we didn't understand how a shadow was there, because there was no light behind the furnace. It was dark. but this shadow was somehow darker. Then it looked at us. I use quotes because, physically, it couldn't look at us, but we just knew it was looking at us. Then it whistled. I'll never forget that tune. I'm not sure if anyone knows the tune, but it was the tune used for yodeling. Needless to say, we ran upstairs to our mom, terrified. She came to check it out, despite us telling her not to, and found nothing. We didn't play in the basement for a week after that, but every so often, we would hear the whistling during the week. And despite us asking our parents if they heard it, they never did. When we went back into the basement to play, at the insistence of our parents, as we were getting in the way of cleaning, etc., everything was okay for a little bit, but eventually the shadow came back. It would always get attention with the same tune, always trying to convince us to come to touch it and see it. Neither of us would ever approach it, and we realized it was stuck to the walls. Literally, it couldn't go up the stairs and could only travel freely along the walls, except for the stairway wall. Side note, I remember telling my mom about this when I was older. She confirmed that the only wall not covered in symbols was the wall with the stairs and the stairs themselves. As long as we remained away from the walls, the shadow man couldn't get to us, and it eventually resorted to yelling before eventually leaving forever. When I was 12, it never appeared again. However, the basement still continued to have weird events. During the summer of my 12th year, my cousin's brother and I were playing as my parents and other family members cleaned up after a barbecue. As we played, the furnace began to glow bright red on the filter door, as if it were being heated by a torch. It had started from the center of the door and grew to encompass the entire door before receding and leaving a bluish-green stain behind. Needless to say, we were all confused. My cousin, who often spent time with his contractor dad, insisted that we take the filter door off and check if it caught fire. We tried to tell him about the weird stuff, but he didn't believe it and was convinced the filter had burned. Upon taking the door off and inspecting it, it was pristine on the inside, in its entirety. The door was still the standard silver, without any indication of burning, and the filter was its standard whitish gray, clean and new, as it was replaced not too long ago. He took the filter off, and there was just a vent. Below that, a sizable amount of space, and a space to reach the pilot light hatch for the furnace. He put everything back together, confused. We got our parents, and his dad checked everything out, save for the door exterior. The furnace was in perfect shape. After this incident, nobody would go in the basement again for a while, unless to store things, at least until I turned 16 and insisted on no longer sharing a room with my brother. I had forgotten the past and decided to move into the basement. Things started to get a lot more terrifying when you slept in an unfinished basement at night. Consistent nightmares and weird sightings, to the point where I often slept at my friends' houses to simply avoid sleeping in that basement. But I will share the most terrifying experience that I have discovered, as my friends ceased to ever stay at my house and insisted upon staying at theirs until we moved. Due to often staying at my friends' houses, their parents began to get a little frustrated that I would never invite them over to my own home to stay the night. I often insisted against it, but eventually relented, as the perfect opportunity came up when my friend's parents were away for a week, and he was to stay behind with me at my place for a week. Needless to say, he was delighted, but I was extremely worried. To explain the basement a little, in order to gain some privacy, and as my family was not well off, we set up a wall using a bed sheet stapled to the beams of the basement ceiling. These sheets were effectively the walls of my room, with a small opening as an entrance. Anyway, I digress. Everything was fine for the most part of the week until roughly the fourth day. Around midnight, my friend couldn't get to sleep and decided to get some sleep in the armchair in the corner of my room, which faced the bedsheet wall. As I was asleep, he awoke in a cold sweat and noticed the bedsheet ruffling a little bit. He noticed what seemed like a handprint on the other side of the sheet pressing against it. Assuming it was my sister, who had a crush on him at the time, he jokingly asked the person on the other side to come around. He tells me that the hand moved along the sheet, with little giggles, towards the edge that was used as an entrance. As it neared the entrance, he expected to see my sister, but nothing appeared. He looked behind the sheet, and there was nothing. Nobody. He didn't sleep the rest of the night and told me about it the next day. On the 5th day, he got over it and determined he was dreaming. And again, the night came. He again woke up in a cold sweat that night to find a girl in a white dress, about our age, standing beside my side of the bed, just looking at me. He told me she wasn't scary. Her face wasn't messed up, but she looked sad. When she saw him, she simply looked at him, frowned, and walked towards the exit again, and he didn't dare move. He told me that I was having nightmares as she stood over me. He didn't stay for the rest of the week. About a few months later, we moved, and he always wanted me to stay at his place until the moving date. When he would come over, he never went into the basement, not even to help me move my stuff. I dream about the house every so often. Weird. Lucid dreams. I can never really go into the basement in these dreams, and sometimes I can't enter the house. But it always seems different, ethereal. Anyway, I have a lot more tales for this home.